Hi friends, welcome to The Fairy Tale Thief, episode 7. We're about halfway through the book and I am debating on whether or not I like reading a full novel. It's been time consuming. I think that my views have gone down. Of course, I haven't been as regular about it. And I just think that maybe shorter stories lend itself better to this format, but I would love to hear your opinion and what you think. Today, I have two dog friends in the house. I have my dog Coco and I have my grand dog, Billy. And Billy is darling, but she's also a little bit of a barker. So I'm hoping that the dogs will not be a hindrance today. They won't be too disturbing. And thank you for joining me. I'm glad you're here. If you enjoy listening to my books that I read myself, then hit the subscribe and like button and let me know, because this is all about you. So here we go. Episode 7 of The Fairy Tale Thief. "What are you doing?" Grandpa Hank asked the next morning. Grace had her microscope set up on the kitchen table with a napkin from the party underneath the lens. She really didn't know what she was looking for, nor did she know why Charmant wanted to poison her, or if that was even his intention. But just having her microscope out of its case made her feel like herself again. "Have you ever seen paper under a microscope, Grandpa?" Grace asked. "It's pretty cool." He grunted and returned to his crossword puzzle. Grace adjusted the lens. "Where'd you get the napkin?" Grandma Dorothy asked. "From the party I went to last night," Grace told her without looking up. "Paper napkins are a waste," she said. "I know, Grandma," Grace answered without lifting her head. "That's why we always use linen," Grandma said. Grace thought about explaining to her grandmother that linen napkins weren't necessarily better for the environment because they needed to be washed in water and soap, but decided it wasn't worth it to argue with someone who was known to fish gently used paper napkins out of McDonald's trash cans and rinse out used sandwich baggies. "Is that contraption your dad's?" Grandma Dorothy asked. "Nope, it's mine." Pride tinged Grace's voice. It was one of her dad's cast-offs, but it was hers now. "What are you going to do with it?" Grandma Dorothy asked. "Look at stuff." "Why?" Grace slowly raised her head from her contraption. She thought about telling her grandmother how there's a whole unexplored world visible beneath the microscope, but what we see with our eyes is so very different under scrutiny. She could have told her about the beauty of a sliced apple or the art of a snowflake or the intricacy of a blood drop. But before she could decide where to start, her grandma said, "What's for breakfast? The kitchen is for food, not fancy toys. If you're going to be in here, you have to make us something to eat." Grace pulled away from her fancy toy, grabbed a box of cereal out of the cupboard, plunked it in front of Grandma Dorothy, gathered up her microscope, and left the room. On Monday, when Grace got to the lilac shop, she found a periwinkle blue dress with embroidered yellow flowers on it and a pair of matching silk shoes waiting for her in the dressing room. Her heart stuttered. Did she really want to give up this cushy job that came with dress-up clothes and go back to shoveling stalls at the Wilsons' dairy? Grace heard her dad's voice in her head saying something about honest work and golden handcuffs. She told her dad's voice to be quiet. If he wanted to have an opinion, he should have stuck around. His voice reminded her that she wasn't being fair. Skipping out on the reserves wasn't a choice after all. Maybe he didn't have a choice, but she did. Grace found Cordelia on a stool behind the cash register. She looked up from her book when Grace walked in. "I knew that dress would look fabulous on you." "How do you do it?" Grace asked her. "Do what?" Cordelia seemed genuinely confused. "How do you find clothes that fit me perfectly?" Cordelia smiled and went back to her book. "A woman deserves her secrets." Cordelia?" Cordelia looked up and blinked her long eyelashes at Grace. Grace hated to ask her for more money since her salary was already really generous, but she had to leave, and to do that, she needed $2,000, enough for a flight and a cheap car. "Is there any way I can earn extra money?" "Extra?" Cordelia blinked again. "What do you need, love?" "A car." "A car?" Cordelia echoed. "I know what you're thinking, but this is not an Orange County sort of car. My friend Kelly told me I can buy your Uncle Billy's Buick. Grace knew that as far as cars went, it was a good deal, but for her, $1,500 was about as attainable as the moon. Unless... Do you want this Billy's Buick? Cordelia asked. The question stumped Grace. Did she really want to drive a Buick with a broken window and a sawed-off muffler? But a car for her wasn't about glamour or prestige. It was about freedom and home. Grace mutely nodded. Well, it just so happens that I do have errands that need running. Would you be willing to go with Freddie to Hurricane Wash and pick up an antique? I was going to send Ernest, but he's complaining about his bad back, and this will require heavy lifting. You'd have to be very careful. What I'm buying is priceless, at least for me. Grace looked around the already crowded room, trying to imagine how they could fit another thing in. It's not for the shop, Cordelia told her, reading Grace's reaction. It's just for me, and Freddie too, of course. When would we go? As soon as your shift is over, if you'd like. Why don't I find Freddie and see what he's got going on? Will you be all right here on your own? Of course. Grace watched Cordelia gather up her purse and head out the front door before taking Cordelia's place on the stool. For not the first time, she wondered how Cordelia could afford to run a shop without customers, and she felt guilty asking for more money. The clock ticked slowly on until finally it was time to change out of her dress and back into her jeans. In the back, she stepped into the dressing room, pulled the curtain closed, and tugged the dress over her head. When she was halfway into her pants, the curtain flew open. Grace screamed and grabbed at it, but a small, gnarled hand held it firmly open. 7 little men frowned at her from the other side of the curtain. Hey, she yelled as she hastily zipped up her pants and threw her tank top over her head. What are you doing? We heard you need money, the ringleader, Prof, said. So? We have money. And you're just going to give it to me so I won't go to the police and tell them you kidnapped me? We didn't kidnap you, one of them yelled. We saved you, another one barked. Huh, that's not how I saw it. Grace rose to the tips of her toes. The doors made her feel tall, and she liked it. You saw it wrong, another growled. Grace blew a loose hair out of her face. Tell me more about the money. We want you to find something, Prof said. And? He pulled a massive red stone out of his pocket. What's that? She asked. What does it look like? He held it up to the light, sending glistening beams shooting through the room. Grace held up her hands. I don't know. It's a ruby. Wow. It's just, if it's real, it has to be worth a fortune. How would I ever sell it? Prof shoved the stone back into his pocket. I can get you gold. Would you rather have gold? Why do you think I can get something you can't? Because he waved his hand in front of her, meaning that she didn't look like a fairy tale character. She looked like she belonged, which just went to prove how little he knew. What are you looking for? Grace found it hard to believe that whatever it was could be more valuable than the ruby the size of a peanut. A mirror. A mirror, she echoed. The mirror. The mirror? You know, mirror, mirror on the wall. It's priceless. Cordelia's words echoed in her mind, and puzzle pieces fell into place. No, this was craziness. You're kidding, right? Prof stepped so close she could feel his breath fanning her chest. Do I look like I'm kidding? No, but I really don't know how to find a missing magic mirror. Try. Okay, all right, I'll try. You do it and we'll get you a car, Prof said. A nice one, the one with a worried look added. A new one, the scowling one snorted. One with working windows, the droopy-eyed one yawned. And windshield wipers, the littlest one added. He took a long drink from the flask he carried. Those are mighty important in Oregon, the scowling one said. Thick and heavy indecision fell over Grace. How do you know about Uncle Billy's car? At that, Prof spit on the floor. Hey, she said, knowing she'd be the one to mop that up. Find the mirror and we'll get you a carriage you can be proud of, Prof said. But I don't want a carriage. A car then. They turned away, grumbling, and shuffled out the door, brushing past Brock, who was on his way in. He flipped his keys in his hands. Friends of yours? They wish. You ready to go? Sure. What are we picking up? She asked, hoping he would say a mirror. It's a cupboard. Aren't those usually attached to walls? His lips formed a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, telling her that Frederick Fitzwilliam either wasn't happy about going to Hurricane Wash to fetch a cupboard, or he was just plain old unhappy. This is, according to my mom, a very important cupboard, although I think it's more of a cabinet or maybe an armoire. Grace followed Brock out the door and waited while he locked it. He pointed at a large Ford F-250 propped up on wheels that said they meant business, that if they had to make their own roads through fields, streams, and mountains, they were prepared to do so. Brock clicked the fob, unlocking the monster's doors, and Grace climbed in. This was a very different animal from her mom's Jeep that only pretended to be okay with going off-road. We're not four-wheeling, are we? No, Brock said without a touch of humor. Good. He started the engine and the truck roared to life, just as noisy as its tires were huge. You know what they say, big tires, big engine. No one says that, Brock said. Without conversation, Brock drove out of the back alley and onto Santa Magdalena Parkway. After a few minutes, when the silence, other than the snarling engine, grew too heavy, Grace said, "Want to tell me the story?" "What story?" "According to Ernest, everything in the lilac shop has a story." "This cupboard isn't for the shop," Brock said. "I bet it still has a story, or else your mom wouldn't want it." He acknowledged this with a twist of his lips. After a few beats of silence, he admitted that he didn't know the story. "Is something bothering you?" Grace asked. He shot her a quick glance, and she could tell he was weighing her trustworthiness. "No," he lied, obviously finding her unworthy. Grace accepted this with a nod. She thought back to Snow White's story. The prince had fallen in love with her only because she was beautiful, but to earn the trust and devotion of the dwarfs, Snow White had to work for it. And true, lots of times beautiful people didn't have to work as hard as others, but they still had to pay a price. She slid Brock a look beneath her eyelids, trying to read him. He caught her gaze. "Alicia," he said. "Oh, you heard about her and Dillinger at the beach?" Grace barely nodded. He slammed his hands against the steering wheel. "Even the new kid knew before me." He tightened his hands on the wheel. They pulled off the parkway and onto a street Grace didn't recognize. The road turned to two lanes, and the further they went, the wilder the landscape grew. Haphazard boulders jutted out of the ground. Knobby and gnarled oak trees created a heavy canopy that sheltered them from the sun. "Is this the best way to get there?" she asked. "It is today," he said. "What does that mean?" Taking one hand off the wheel, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and flicked it onto her lap. The navigational screen freeways glowed red. "Maybe we should have waited for another day," she said, feeling discouraged. The screen showed that although the roads they traveled wasn't outlined with red dots, it was winding and indirect. She foresaw a very long, silent drive. "Couldn't." "I'm sorry?" Brock sucked in a long breath. "We can't wait another day. My mom is going to Europe on Thursday, and she wants to get the cupboard before she goes." "So what's wrong with Tuesday and Wednesday?" "Today was just better, all right." "Sure, fine." "I'm sorry, I'm not used to your girlfriends hooking up with other guys." He gave her a reluctant grin. "Yeah, that." He's tapped the steering wheel. "I should have known, though." "Why? You don't know that guys are notoriously bad at picking women?" "Why would you say that? Geez, that's sexist." Grace bristled. "But it's true. It's been happening for generations. In almost every fairy tale, some stupid king is falling for a beautiful woman who turns out to be a wicked stepmother." Brock shook his head. "This wasn't a fairy tale." "Well, obviously. Besides, not all stepmothers are wicked. My mom, case in point." "I still find it hard to believe you aren't Cordelia's. You look just like her." A strained expression crossed his face, so she quickly added, "But with whiskers and more muscles, of course." He barked out a laugh. "What happened to your dad?" she asked softly, hoping she wasn't trespassing on forbidden territory. "I don't know." "Oh, I'm sorry." Brock shrugged. "Cordelia is all I can remember, and she's more than enough." Grace wasn't quite sure what that meant, so she bit her lip, hoping that he'd offer more of an explanation. She didn't have to wait too long. "He was military, died overseas. I really don't remember anything about him. Cordelia said he was a hero, though." "My dad is also in the military." "I know. Your grandpa brags about him." "That can't be true." Why would I lie about that? For your information, my grandpa hates my dad. And why would you lie about that? Grace felt silent, wondering if it was possible that she only assumed her grandfather hated her dad because she knew for a fact that her dad hated her grandfather. She thought back over all the things she'd heard her dad say about Grandpa Hank. Materialistic, prideful, stingy, money-driven were some of her dad's favorite adjectives for his father-in-law. Grace, you know my grandparents, so where are yours? He shrugged. I don't have any. What? How is that possible? Cordelia and my dad were both only children. My dad's parents died in a car accident shortly after my dad passed, and my mom was raised by a single mother who, as it turns out, according to my mom, is not a nice person. Wow, it's so strange you don't have any cousins, aunts, uncles? Brock wagged his head. I told you, Cordelia's enough. I have a huge family, like really huge. My dad comes from a family of 11 kids. They all live in Oregon and they have giant families too. I have so many cousins, I don't know how to count them all. Are you bragging? He asked, grinning. Sort of. You might have lots of money and cool cupboards and stuff, but I have lots of people. Do you miss them? I do, but I'm pretty sure my mom, not so much. Why do you say that? I don't think she feels like she fits in. When people start talking about their chickens or their vegetable gardens, she doesn't have much to add. Do you feel that way too? No, I loved going to their farms. We'd spend a week every summer at my grandparents' ranch, riding horses, helping my grandma pick apples and berries for jams and pies. I can't even imagine, Brock said. Grace spent the next hour telling him about her Southern Oregon adventures, about the dog that tried to swallow a chipmunk whole, the chicken that lost all its feathers so her grandma had to knit it a sweater, and Colton, the youngest cousin, who got his tongue stuck to a metal pole one frosty morning. The navigational system steered them through a small dusting town to where the highway met the I-15. Despite the increase in traffic, Brock laughed at all her stories. After they pulled off the interstate and followed a long road to a double-wide trailer in the middle of nowhere, he turned to her and put the truck in park. Hey, thanks, he said. For what? Making me laugh? You're welcome. The trailer sat at the edge of a ridge bordering a canyon. Before they opened the truck's doors, a pack of motley dogs greeted them. They came in all shapes and sizes. Their only commonality, besides the fur, teeth, and noise, was that not one of them was a determinate breed. A woman in denim overalls stepped out of the trailer. Although the sun was beginning to fade and a sharp wind blew through the scrub oak, she wore nothing beneath her overalls but a sweat-stained bra. Shut up, she shouted at the dogs. They milled around her like a collection of furry wind-up toys, bumping into each other to press their noses against the woman's legs. As a greeting, the woman jerked her head toward a wooden structure too small to be a barn and too dilapidated to be a building. I'm Violet Bing, she said over her shoulder. Grace followed Brock, Violet, and the dogs into the outbuilding. Sunlight filtered through the chinks in the ill-fitting wall boards and cast long shadows over the collection of stuff. The cupboard stood apart from the piled boxes and stacks of books, like it had been waiting for them to arrive. Dust and grime clung to its sides and doors, but rosy wood and intricate carving entranced Grace. A soft whistle escaped her lips. You got the money? Violet asked. Brock pulled out his wallet and showed her a wad of bills. Violet watched, her greedy eyes carefully counting as he handed her the money. The dogs, catching a whiff of Violet's excitement, scurried around soundlessly. It's worth more than that, Violet said without conviction, but I'm letting it go because it don't fit with my decor. Brock lifted an eyebrow at Grace, which she interpreted to mean, Violet has decor? Grace tried to help move the cupboard, which probably outweighed her by 50 pounds, but Brock waved her away. I think it's easier on my own. He leaned into the cupboard and lifted it off its bun feet. Please don't be macho. Your mom is paying me to help you. Grace stepped in front of him. And I'll pay you to stay out of my way, he said. Used to belong to my uncle, a magician, Violet said, although he didn't call himself that. Called himself an illusionist. What was his name? Grace asked, trying to be polite while tagging after Brock to make sure he didn't drop the cupboard on his toes. Called himself Half-Light Harvey, Grace snorted. My dad called him Half-Wit Perv, but that's another story. Everything has a story, Brock muttered. What's that? Violet asked. Everything has a story, he repeated in a louder voice. The story is what makes the thing valuable. Well, there ain't no... Violet caught herself. You folks from the OC? He is. Grace jerked her thumb at Brock while he tried hoisting the cupboard into the back of the Ford. I'm from Oregon. Violet's eyes brightened as if she suddenly found Grace interesting. This mutt here is from Oregon. She rubbed the fur of a mid-sized dog with a rounded snout. Brock's face started to purple. Knowing he wasn't going to ask for help, Grace went to stand beside him and placed her hands next to his. Together, they slid the cupboard into the truck's bed. Do you think we should lay it down on its back? Grace asked. Brock nodded and they eased the cupboard onto its back. The door flapped open and a paper escaped. It hung in the air for a moment before Grace caught it. What's that? Brock asked, brushing his hands on his jeans. I'm not sure, she said. Brock looked over her shoulder at a scrawl of cursive written in fading ink on a yellowing sheet of paper. Read it in the truck, he said. In a lower voice, he added, let's get out of here. Chapter 12. How does my mom find this stuff? Brock tightened his grip on the steering wheel and turned back onto the highway. His thoughts churned with unanswered questions. He wanted to confide in Grace, but he didn't dare. Have you asked her? Not this time. Asking in the past hadn't been useful. Do you want to get something to eat? I'll treat. No, Grace insisted. I'll pay my own way. Brock pulled up beside a small joint with a sign that read, Hurricanes Hamburgers. Are you sure you don't want anything? He asked as they sat at a picnic table covered with a vinyl red and white check cloth. I'm sure, Grace told him. Brock rolled his eyes and went to place his order while Grace pulled out the paper they'd found. Nerves tingled through him. The paper made him edgy. He was used to it, well, sort of, the strange things his mom brought home, but he didn't want anyone else to know. He felt protective of his mom and nervous about what could happen if people found out she collected oddities. Brock returned to the table a few minutes later with 2 hot dogs smothered in ketchup, mustard, and relish, a mound of French fries, and 2 cups of water. This is so, Grace began. Delicious? He asked right before biting in one of the hot dogs. No, she said. Incredible. Incredible how? The blood in his head pounded, but he tried to ignore it. He played it cool, focused on his hot dog. Grace showed him the paper. According to this, you can put anything into the cupboard and it will manifest your secret desire. Brock snorted a half laugh, even though he found the situation becoming less and less funny. So you mean if I put a French fry in the cupboard and wish it to be a hamburger, it'll turn into a hamburger? Yes, I think that's exactly what it means. Brock bit into his hot dog and took his time chewing and swallowing. What if you don't want your desire manifested? Grace frowned at him. Everyone wants their desires manifested. No, not everyone. You might know something's not good for you, but you want it anyway. He couldn't help thinking of Alicia. Well, it'd be tricky, of course. You couldn't put in a rock and wish for a truck. Grace wrinkled her forehead and stared at the cupboard. Why not? Because the truck would be too big. It would crush the cupboard, and then you wouldn't have it anymore. Maybe you could recycle the wood. Brock hoped he sounded indifferent. Grace laughed. You're not taking this seriously. And neither are you. At least I hope you're not. We have to try it. Are you going to help me? Maybe I don't want you to know my secret desires, she said. I meant, are you going to help me eat the French fries? Oh. She took a few of the fries and chewed as she read. Wait, there's a clause. What kind of magic cupboard has a clause? This one does. She skimmed over the paper. In fact, it looks like there are a bunch of clauses and provisions. Like what? Well, the cupboard may not grant or deny life. Grace read directly from the paper. So it can't kill or bring people back to life? Grace nodded. Oh, this is interesting. One must have pure purpose of heart. I wonder what that means. Brock tried to look ambivalent and ate his French fries with studied intention. Still, Brock laughed. It sounded forced to his ears, but he hoped it fooled Grace. You don't really believe that Violet had a magic cupboard, do you? I guess not, Grace said, her tone suggesting she wished otherwise. I still want to try it. Brock scowled at her, afraid of what would happen if they did try. What if it was magic? It really wouldn't be so different from the whispering painting or some of the other things he'd seen. I don't. Why not? All that religious training from the Catholic school. How is a magic cupboard so different from a burning bush or the parting of the Red Sea? Brock's French fry froze midair. Seriously? He scooted away from her. I better stand back so I don't get charred when you burst into flames. As he hoped it would, Grace let it go. Kelly arrived on Thursday night. When Grace saw her at the airport, homesickness rose in her throat, choking her with the longing for home. Kelly looked the same, tall, thin, long, dark, curly hair. She launched herself into Grace's arms. They laughed, hugged, and cried. Arm in arm, they headed for the baggage claim. Kelly filled her in on all the Sam and Dale gossip on their way home from Santa Ana, and Grace told her about her new friends, Brock, and the magic cupboard. In her head, Grace compared Santa Magdalena to Sam and Dale. She tried to see Santa Magdalena through Kelly's eyes. Grace had been to Orange County off and on all her life, so she couldn't remember the first time she'd spotted a limousine idling at an intersection, or a small tract house with landscaping that rivaled a hotel on the Las Vegas Strip. Kelly's eyes widened when they pulled up to the Bear Ranch gates behind the line of Mercedes, Teslas, and the occasional gardener's truck. The guard waved them in. Kelly whistled when they drove past Brock's house. It looks like it belongs in a fairy tale. I know, right? And it's so weird, especially since meeting the dwarfs and Prince Charming. Don't forget the magic cupboard. Have you tried it? Grace shook her head. Why not? Grace shrugged. Brock didn't want to, so I didn't push it. We have to. Kelly bounced on the edge of her seat. Grace sucked in a deep breath, remembering all the other times Kelly's ideas had gotten them into trouble, like the time they'd snuck into Dr. Burge's pool when they thought he was on vacation and he thought he was alone, or when Kelly borrowed her mom's car before she knew how to drive, or, really, the list was pretty long and about as ugly as a naked Dr. Burgess in the middle of a green mud skin treatment. Grace tightened her fingers around the steering wheel. I'm not going to ask Brock again. Kelly jutted out her chin. Then I will. Grace slid her a glance. You don't even know him. I'll get to know him. That was one of the things Grace admired about Kelly. She was able to see exactly what she wanted and go after it. Where is he? Grace hated that she knew the answer. She didn't want to stalk Brock. She knew that he, sort of, had a girlfriend. She knew that he thought of Grace as just a friend. And yet, given that she lived right next door, she had learned to pick up and read Brock's clues. The surfboard in the back of his BMW convertible meant the beach. His track uniform meant cross-country practice. A backpack meant a study session. Kelly lightly punched her arm. You know, don't you? Grace's cheeks flamed. I don't know where he is right this second. She pulled the Jeep into the garage beside her grandpa's aged Oldsmobile. But, Grace relented. There's a football game tonight and an after party at Patrick Swenson's house. Kelly beamed. So his house is empty? Grace put the car in park and swiveled to look Kelly in the eye. Are you crazy? They have a security system. Kelly grinned. Do you know how to turn it off? Grace climbed from the Jeep and slammed the door. Kelly followed. How did you know? Grace asked in a small voice. Oh, please, I can read you. What? Kelly pulled out a suitcase. Well, for one thing, you always rub your nose when you lie. I do not. Instinctively, Grace started to raise her hand to scratch her nose, but stopped herself and shoved both hands into her pockets. Kelly's laugh echoed off the garage walls. All right, fine. Brock gave me the code when I helped him move the cupboard into the garage, but seriously, how do you know I had the security code? Kelly lifted his shoulder. The real question is, what are we going to do about it? You are so bad for me, Grace said, pulling her hands from her pockets so she could help Kelly's luggage from the back of the Jeep. We have to make sure Brock goes to the game, Kelly said, following her into the house. How are we going to do that? Heather, Kelly breathed as they opened the door and met Heather and Toby in the mudroom. Hey, Kelly, Heather said. How are you? She held out her palm. Where are you guys going? Grace asked, placing the Jeep's keys in Heather's outstretched hand. I promised Toby we'd do something fun if he aced his math test, Heather said. And I totally did. Toby gave them a fist pump. Awesome, Grace said, rubbing the top of his head. So, what are you doing for fun? Kelly asked. We really haven't decided yet, Heather said. Heather wants to go to the lake, but I told her it's for babies, Toby complained. Why do you say that? Grace asked. Oh, please, Toby wailed. It's super shallow, and there's a cement underneath the sand. Besides, Hudson calls it the pee-pee pool. Grace lifted her eyebrow at Heather. Hudson is his new BFF and the authority on everything, Heather explained. You should get to choose what you do, Kelly told Toby. Well, of course, but Heather said. Grace saw thoughts spinning in Kelly's head. The football game, Kelly explained. I heard that Superman is going to be at the halftime show. Does Hudson like football? Grace elbowed Kelly. Superman is not going to be at the football game. Or maybe it was Spider-Man, Kelly put in. Stop lying, Grace told her. Toby turned to Heather with a pleading look on his face, as if he truly expected to see Spider-Man or Superman swoop onto the Santa Magdalena football field. We have to go. No, you don't, Grace said. It'll be boring. Heather smiled. I think it's a great idea. Do you think this Brock guy will be there too? Kelly asked slyly. Why? Heather studied Grace for a few seconds before a knowing smile crept over her face. You like him. Grace wanted to hide her flushing cheeks with her hands, but since she was holding Kelly's luggage, she couldn't. He has a girlfriend. But you said he found out about her kissing that other guy, Heather said. Kelly beamed. Do you want us to spy on Brock? Toby asked, his eyes sparkling. Why don't you come with us? Heather asked. Oh, I don't like football, Kelly said. Can't stand it. Have to shut myself in my room on Super Bowl weekend to avoid the hype. And since Kelly's only here for a few days, Grace added, but I think you guys should do something else, something more fun. I like football, Heather said. I like spying on people, Toby said. Good to know, Grace muttered, pushing through the mudroom and up the back stairs. That was way too easy, Kelly whispered as she followed. Grace imagined Kelly in her future career as a powerful attorney, contorting words until defendants, jury, and judges truly believed whatever Kelly wanted them to. What if Brock doesn't go? Grace whispered back. What if we go over there and he's in the bathroom or something? It'll be like naked Dr. Burgess all over again. No, it won't. Nothing could be like Dr. Burgess, Kelly shuddered. Besides, we won't go unless he leaves, she said, and we'll be really fast. How do you know how fast we can be? You don't know anything about magic cupboards. Yeah, but I want to learn, and if you admit it, so do you. Kelly was so right. Brock sat on a stool in front of the cupboard studying it. Fading daylight filtered in through the tiny windows cut into the garage doors, and dust particles sparkled in the air. Sometimes it seemed as if everything in his life was as fleeting as the dust floating around him. He had never stayed in one place very long. He'd learned to make friends quickly, but he had never mastered the knack of holding on to them after a move. And a move, like everything else, was always on the horizon. Anything was possible, and everything was for sale for the right price. Everything was negotiable. When they changed houses, as they did every couple of years, everything in the house changed as well. New towels, new sheets, new rugs, new sofas. Maybe that was why Brock liked math. Numbers were concrete. He could build on them. He could count on 2 + 2 equaling 4 in a way that he could never count on anything else. Numbers were real, substantial. They didn't change. They made sense in a way that almost nothing in Brock's life ever could. So many things in Brock's world did not make sense. Take, for example, this cupboard. Brock closed his eyes and made a wish. Seconds later, he opened the cupboard and drew out a golden coin. Studying it, he knew that it should make him happy. He rubbed it against his sweater. It gleamed a shade brighter, ramping up his frustration. He slipped the coin into his pocket. Most people, he knew, would be delighted to have found a cupboard that could spontaneously produce cash and prizes. But for Brock, the cupboard was just another puzzle piece in a lifelong riddle without answers. At 6:15, Brock's garage door slid open. Kelly, who had been sitting on the window seat in Grace's room, pretending to read, put down her book. She started to sing the Mission Impossible theme song. Da, 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 da. This is such a bad idea, Grace muttered. Admit it, you want to do it as bad as I do. Grace rolled her eyes, hating that Kelly was right, and trying to fight the nerves niggling in her belly. Any idea where the cupboard might be? It's probably still in the garage. Grace bit her lip, debating whether or not to tell Kelly that testing the cupboard would be cool, but what she really wanted to do was find the mirror so she could give it to the dwarfs and then they'd stop. Wait. She wasn't going to steal a mirror or anything else. Besides, she didn't believe in magic mirrors. She shook herself. This is all craziness. Kelly nodded, a giant grin on her face. I've missed you so much. I missed you too. Grace swallowed hard. Let's go. They skulked down the stairs, past the living room where Jeannie and the grandparents were watching Wheel of Fortune, out the back door, and through the yard. Kelly balked at the stone wall separating the yards from the Brockbanks. Wouldn't it be easier to just go through the front gate? Kelly asked. Are you kidding? Don't you see that all our neighbors are within spitting distance? Grace pointed to the right. See that house? That's Mrs. Robertson. She has 3 very noisy Yorkies. You can't be scared of Yorkies, right? They're purse puppies. I'm not scared of the dogs. I'm scared of Mrs. Robertson. And across the street, there's a chick Toby calls the stalker walker. What? Yeah, stalker walker. She walks around the neighborhood like 24/7. Come on. No, seriously. The rumor is she doesn't like her mom's boyfriend, so she walks up and down the street with her earphones on whenever his car's there. I know it's rude. I'm sure she doesn't want to be called the stalker walker, just like I don't want to be called the neighborhood cupboard burglar or something equally stupid. Grace took hold of the pepper tree branch and pulled herself up. The tree's tiny red seed pods rained on her as if trying to stop her budding, breaking, and entering career. She balanced on top of the wall. You're coming, right? Kelly grabbed the tree with both hands. Right behind you. Beneath the cover of the pepper tree's branches and leaves, Grace hesitated just for a moment before she pushed off. She landed with a thud on the Brockbanks lawn. The Yorkies next doors began to yap. Seconds later, Kelly fell beside her, but she bounced up, brushed off her clothes, and flashed Grace a scheming grin. Let's go, Kelly mouthed, heading for the side door of the garage. Grace put a hand out, stopping her. She lifted her chin at the security camera above the door. I have to disable the system. Lifting the small plastic lid, Grace quickly typed in the password, GRIMM. The system played a tune that sounded like it belonged in a nursery rhyme. Then the screen went dark. Kelly watched with large eyes. Grim? Are you kidding me? By now, Grace's fingers were shaking. While outside the sun still hovered on the horizon, milky darkness filled the inside of the garage. It took a moment for her vision to adjust to the gloom. Brock stood at the edge of the bleachers with Ashton and Bean. Alicia and the other girls on the cheer squad shook their pom-poms and kicked their legs. He tried not to look at her. He felt bad about how he had ended things with her, but not bad enough that they had ended. He knew he should have broken up with her weeks, if not months, before he actually had. He caught sight of Grace's sister and brother in the stands. Heather was talking with the pretty boy he'd seen at Lisa's party in the circus. Toby was staring directly at Brock. Brock waved, but Toby flushed and looked away. Why is he staring at you? Bean asked. Brock shrugged. They're your neighbors now, right? Ashton asked. Brock nodded. Where's the little one? Bean asked. You mean Grace? Brock asked, his voice taut. She's in my bio class, Ashton said. That doesn't give you first dibs on her, Bean said. Can't take dibs on her, Brock said. She's a person, not a candy bar. I'd like to take a bite out of her, Bean said. What are you, a vampire? Ashton asked, elbowing him. Bean snorted. I just want to taste. Brock shoved his hands into his pockets and felt the smooth, round coin. It reminded him that, for him, nothing was real, nothing lasted. He turned and walked away. What's with him? He heard Bean ask. He likes her, you moron, Ashton said. The Oregon girl? Since when? Alicia was like 5 minutes ago, Bean huffed. I can't keep up. You don't have to. In fact, it's easier if you don't, Ashton said. Kelly ran her hand over the cupboard. It's beautiful. Grace agreed. It really was. It's Danish, supposedly from the 1700s. How does it work? Kelly asked. Grace told Kelly about the paper she'd found. Here. Kelly pulled her hairband out. Free from its ponytail, her thick brown hair tumbled around her shoulders. She gingerly opened the cupboard door and set the plastic band inside. Now what? Grace asked. I'll make a wish. Like what? I don't know, but it can't be too big. Or alive, because that's creepy. Better than being dead. A battery-operated clock on the wall ticked, counting off the minutes until they were caught. Grace elbowed Kelly. Hurry. Grace screwed her eyes closed and held deathly still. Her eyes flew open, and she unlatched the cupboard door. What is it? Kelly drew out a piece of paper. It was yellowing and crumbled and smelled earthy like the pepper tree. Was that there before? Grace's voice caught in her throat. Kelly shook her head. The paper fluttered in her hands. But that's... What is it? Grace didn't wait too long for her to finish, but tugged the paper out of her fingers. I can't read it. It's too dark. Kelly nodded at the door leading into the house. No, Grace exhaled. You know you want to. Grace blew out a breath. Okay, but just into the hall. Kelly headed for the windowless room Cordelia called the workroom. Once inside, she flipped on the light. What does it say? Kelly asked, leaning over her shoulder. Her breath blew against Grace's neck, tickling her. Grace studied the formal handwriting. It's a Hans Christian Andersen story, she said. The Tinderbox. Do you know that one? Do you? My mom's an English teacher, remember? She loves fairy tales, especially Hans Christian Andersen's. Kelly shook her head. Why would that be there? I don't know. What did you wish for? A fairy tale. Chills tingled all over Grace's skin. You didn't, Kelly nodded. Grace flipped the paper over. Oh, this is interesting. It says the cupboard was made from the tree where the soldier hid. What does that even mean? Grace sucked in her deep breath. Here, I'll read it to you. On a cold winter's night, a poor soldier journeyed along a path leading to his home. His shoes were worn, his coat thin, and his heart weary. Miles yet to go, he came upon an old woman. Young man, would you be so kind as to climb this hollow tree and retrieve a tinderbox? She pointed her cane at a gnarled and blackened tree not far from the path. If you would so oblige a poor woman's request, you may keep anything you find within the tree. Only bring me the tinderbox. To the soldier, the tree looked as hollow and bleak as his future, but he granted the old woman's wish. To his amazement, inside the tree, he found 3 dogs guarding 3 large rooms filled with coins. The dog with eyes the size of teacups guarded a vault filled with pennies. The dog with eyes the size of supper plates protected a vault filled with silver. And the one with eyes the size of windmills watched over a vault filled with gold. The soldier gathered as much of the gold as his pockets could hold and dutifully retrieved the tinderbox. Back on the path, he approached the old woman. She bypassed all this gold for this old tinderbox, he thought, studying the box. It looked plain, old, and of little worth, but the soldier knew that looks could be deceiving. Why would she do this? It must be worth in all the pennies, silver, and gold combined. Young man, the box! The old woman held out her hands. Without another thought, the soldier drew his sword and plunged it into the old woman's heart. With gold jiggling in his pockets, he tucked the tinderbox beneath his arm and headed for the city where he lived a life of luxury until his wealth was spent. Forced to live in a dark and dreary attic, one day he strikes the tinderbox. A dog materialized in front of him. He realized that the dogs were at his call and that they would fetch money from the tree at his command. Again, he lived in wealth, but all the gold in the tree could not buy him love. He sought the hand of a princess. He sent the largest dog to bring her to his home. They spent a night of love together, but before dawn, the dog returned the princess to her castle. In the morning, the princess told her parents about her strange dream. Suspicious, the king and queen guard their daughter closely. The following night, when the dog arrived to once again carry the princess away, the soldier was discovered. The king threw the soldier into prison and sentenced him to death. On the day of the execution, the soldier begged for his tinderbox and requested one last smoke. He struck the tinderbox. All 3 dogs appeared. They tossed the king and queen into the air, and they were dashed to pieces when they fell to the earth. The princess and soldier were reunited, and the dogs joined in the wedding feast. Grace looked up from the paper. It's kind of actually a horror story. So what does it mean? Kelly asked again. It means you're trespassing, Brock said. And that is the end of episode 7. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoy the story, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button and tell your friends. Thanks. Bye.